Hi, this is Eric for Z1UG. Before we start, I wanted to inform you, my audience, that God has given me a new project that may interfere with the regular publication of the QSO Today podcast. That project is blood cancer that has caused osteoporosis and a bunch of other issues since the middle of the summer. As long as I have guests and can physically put the podcast together, I will try to hold to my schedule. Karen and I have amazing family, friends, neighbors, and community around us to help us complete this project with success. God willing, this will be one more project completed successfully. I'm inclined to share this project with you on my blog. I hope that it may help some of you to see the signs. QSO Today, episode 523, Ron Taylor, WA7GIL. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. My thanks to my regular monthly and annual subscribers for their support of QSO Today. Their names are listed on the donations page. I received one-time donations this week from Richard Rossi, N4PSX, $125. Thomas White, 86TW, $10. Todd Mitchell, N0IP, $10. Robert Hinden, KI6ASK, $25. James Leonard, KA6KSN, $5. We have supporters and donors who wish to remain anonymous, and I want to thank them for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Just a reminder to look at the links in the show notes pages for links to my ham radio calendar, past episodes of QSO Today, and QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo videos. Ron Taylor, WA7GIL, while having a love for HFCW, boat anchor restoration and kit building, still stays current with homebrew equipment using Arduino controllers, the latest ham radio software, and the Nano VNA. His beautiful ham shack and carefully appointed workbench and parts inventory allow Ron to build and fix just about anything. WA7GIL is my QSO Today. WA7GIL, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Ron?
Yes, Eric. Good morning from here. I guess good evening there. Boy, you've got a strong signal, S9 plus 20 here in Arizona. 4Z1UG, WA7GIL.
Thankfully, I'm running on fiber. People perhaps could say, well, that's what you eat is fiber, but I'm actually on a fiber optic service here, and that seems to have changed my game. Ron, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, thank you. Yes, I think it was 1961. I was about 10 years old, and I, like a lot of guys that time, that age, maybe now too, I had built a lot of crystal radios, and I was playing around on one day that happened to be tunable, and I tuned it up above the top of the broadcast band, and I heard this guy talking, and it wasn't a station, a normal station. It was an individual talking, very, very strong signal, and something he said, I don't remember, led me to figure out that he was a neighbor just down the street. And so 10-year-old kid, I just immediately ran down the street, knocked on his door, and he opened up and let me in and showed me what he was doing. He was in the middle of a 160-meter AM roundtable QSO in the region area. He stuck the microphone in front of me. I got scared to death. I said something I don't even remember, but I'll tell you what, the hook was sunk at that point.
And what was the hometown?
Phoenix, Arizona.
So you're Arizona born and bred.
No, my twin brother and I and the next younger brother were born in Texas, but we moved out here when I was about 5.5. And so almost a native. Close enough, I guess.
Was this neighbor your first Elmer, your first mentor in ham radio?
Interestingly, no, I never saw him again, never said another word to him. That was the end of that. The next step didn't happen for about 2 more years, around 1963. My twin brother, Doug, and I were in 7th grade, and this 7th grade teacher, who wasn't our teacher, he came in early every day for about an hour early, and he taught a CW and theory class to get kids that wanted to ready for the novice test. And so we both took that and learned the code in about 3 days, like you can do when you're 12 years old. And he had a homebrew keyer that he built, a couple of tubes, I recall, and he'd turn it on, it'd warm up, and whoop in and start working. And he'd give us his lesson every day. I still remember his call sign because he said it every time, and it was K7LIN, Lima, India, November. Didn't know his name for years because he was just Mr. So-and-so, but I looked him up in an old logbook and his, or call book, and his name was Pat, I believe.
Do you have an identical twin?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So do I.
Very good.
It was never something I appreciated until I was in my adult years. So, Doug, and you have another brother, that you all became hams at the same time?
No, I was the only one in the family for years and years. And I have 3 brothers. The youngest one never got interested in it. That's Paul Taylor, by the way, is his name. They waited till in the 90s sometime after it was 5 words a minute, still code requirement still. And my twin brother and the younger brother and our father all went down and became hams. And they all progressed to extra class. And we've had a lot of fun since that time. Prior to that, it was just me.
And do you all live in the same area?
Well, not really. I live here near Phoenix in Peoria, and my younger brother, Larry, W7LDT, he lives up in a little town near Prescott, Arizona. The twin, Doug, he lives over in West Texas, Amarillo, and Paul lives in Idaho.
You wrote someplace that you, since 2017, do your field days together?
Yes, we do. The 3 of us like to get together. We missed it last year and really missed it, but we've been doing it every year since about 2016, and that's when I retired, had more time. It was a blast. We started out doing it QRP with Yaesu FT817 type radios, and the very next year we started doing some of the kit radios, like QRP Labs came out with that QCX then, and we started doing that. I guess that was 2018.
You're a 10-year-old. You're making crystal radios. You're listening to crystal radios. You must have had an affinity for electronics and radios since the time you were very young.
Yeah, I knew I liked it. I knew I really liked the ideas behind it. I've read it before. You like the idea that something you wired together has sound coming out of it from far distances, that kind of thing. I enjoyed that. I didn't know what all I really enjoyed, but our dad bought us a kit for Christmas one time that had 3 projects you could build, and I remember what they all were. One was a telegraph set where you wound the coils and stuff and played telegraph, and then and one was a telephone. I can't remember what the third one was, but that was fun, and he always, Mom and Dad both encouraged us always on that. Dad had built a kind of a lab arrangement in our bedroom that had 12-volt battery outside and a large cable, but he tapped all the cells, so we had a big switch, and we could switch 2, 4, 6, 8 up to 12 volts for things we were building. Wasn't dangerous.
No high voltage on the bench, although it seems to me having 100 amperes of 12 volts could warm things up.
You don't want to get your ring stuck in it, that's for sure.
Did you have an affinity for math and science and things like this as you got older, as you proceeded into junior high and high school?
Yes, I did. I recall all along that math to me was very easy. I didn't have the affinity to the point of wanting to pursue that as a career, just numbers for the sake of numbers and things. But I don't mean that, but I didn't see it that way. It felt like something that was good to know. It turned out it was a good thing to know. Science, the same thing. I just loved science and school. Sometimes school, you didn't always get everything you wanted. You got what they taught, you know. I do remember going through the libraries looking for specific things when I was really getting curious and being frustrated. I couldn't find books, specific books on electronic projects and things like that. So that was tough, but we had fun.
Once you got your ham license, were you getting any amateur radio magazines?
Actually, yeah, I subscribed to 73 magazine, I think it was back then, when I was very young. That was a good one. It had some good stuff in there. So anyway, I didn't get to get the license till 1966. So there was more time delay in there. What happened was we went through that seventh grade class ready to take the test, and then our life was changing. The parents bought this 5-acre patch of alfalfa out here in northwest of Phoenix, out in the county, and we immediately planted 100 pecan trees on it. My twin and I were 12, and dug a lot of holes. We dug 100 holes here, and I'm talking about 6 feet deep holes. Through rock and all kinds of stuff, and we also dug the same number across the street. They had their best friends did the same thing, bought 5 acres out here and planted pecan trees also. So that was a good growing up thing, but it did delay the ham stuff for a little while. I had kept thinking about it and wondering, and a good friend of mine in 8th grade, well, we met in 8th grade when we moved out here, but he one day announced, I think we were freshmen or sophomores in high school already, he announced to me that he got his ham license. I was like, oh man, that's what I've been always wanting to do. So I just freshened up the knowledge and went and sat for the test. A friend of my dad's gave it to me. And the license, back then they took forever, a couple of months it felt like, and it finally came in around October of 1966. So I was 15.
And what was the call sign?
Well, it was WN7GIL. I never changed it. Somebody asked me once, why don't you change it, especially when I got my extra? And I just said, well, I know what it sounds like coming through the aurora, over the poles. I like this. It's an easy call, but it gets a little cumbersome compared to the four-digit ones, but I like it. I can hear it. I always got accused. A lot of people call me Gil. I didn't even realize when. At the time, there was some cartoon character by that name in the ham magazines. Maybe you don't even know what I'm talking about. I didn't know at the time what it was, but they called me Gil. Thought I had a special call sign or something.
I keep my WA6GIL call from the 70s just because nowadays it makes you look like an old-timer. When we were growing up, in the 60s and 70s, if you had a K6 call, you were an old-timer. But now anybody can get them.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep the WA6 for the reason of it makes me look like an old-timer. Let me ask you a question. Your interest in science and engineering and amateur radio, did that lead you to a course of study and career in the technical fields? Oh,
yes, indeed it did. I went into electrical engineering. That's what I ended up getting my degree in. I was just always interested in electricity and electronics, and it just seemed the thing to do. Our father was a engineer at one of the other power companies around here, and he ended up in his career becoming chief engineer of the company, and so he advised me on it, but said, do what you want. But he said, if you do a power curriculum, you can get into a power company and then do whatever they have, to do. And he says it's more stable than necessary. If you're thinking of stability, it's more stable than getting a job with one of the Motorola's or somebody that depend on a lot of government contracts and whatnot. He just said, if you want to move around a lot, go there. If you want to be stable, go here. That's my advice. And so I did pursue the power curriculum, but just that's not what I ended up doing, fortunately. But it got me in the door.
At the end of the Apollo era, didn't Phoenix suffer big layoffs of engineers as a result of the demand for components and everything going down?
Yes, yeah. We had a lot of large companies here that went up and down with various programs and contracts and things. So it was kind of volatile. Everybody I knew that went there changed jobs several times in their career, and that's fine. And they did all right. But I wanted a little more stability in my life than that.
If you wanted to stay in Arizona and take care of 5 acres of pecan trees and also be an engineer, it seems like that was the right track to go.
Right. I didn't know I was going to be in charge of the pecan trees. My wife and I ended up buying it from my folks back in about 1995. So but until then, I had no idea that was coming.
And what kind of business is that? I mean, is it pretty labor intensive?
Yeah, labor intensive and totally non-lucrative. It's too small to be a large, profitable operation. I don't charge myself for my own labor, so it shows some profit, but and it pays its taxes duly, but it won't pay. It won't even pay the property tax. To put it bluntly, it's kind of. We look at it as something we do in order to live here, so we like it. It's very nice. It's quiet.
How many tons of pecans does 5 acres make?
Well, in the old days, it may make about maybe 2.5 tons. When town grew up all around us, we were no longer allowed to use certain pesticides and things, so some of the pests are getting to them now. So we're probably closer to a ton now.
You're a gentleman pecan farmer.
That's the word. I've heard that term before.
Let's talk about the power business. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that actually went through the power engineering side of the BSEE program and then went to work for a utility company. I've certainly have a lot of experience with utility companies from a previous life in the United States. Talk a little bit about what opportunities were open to you as a result of entering a utility company as an engineer.
Well, yeah. At that time, my company had I think they still do, had what they call a rotating engineering program. So for the first year of employment, went around to various departments and worked in different groups and learned what they did and how it all interfaced with the other groups. It was good, very, very good training program. The very first group I rotated through happened to be communications engineering. At that point, I knew a little bit about utility telecom because I had worked a couple summers at the other power company in their radio shop, and they had promised me I could go to mountaintops where it was cool in the summer and work on microwave. And what they ended up doing was asking me to sit in the screen room all the time and fix pagers and stuff because I showed some talent for that. I should not have showed that talent. I would have got up to the mountaintops. But so I knew this. I knew utilities had some telecom. I wasn't real familiar with all of it, but man, I found out the power plants back then were mostly coal-fired, and they were way out in the boonies somewhere all over the state and other states. And they all had to communicate for protection reasons, power line relaying. And, of course, there's staff out there that need telephones and radios and all that stuff. So we had statewide microwave networks early on, a lot of copper cable early on between substations around the valley. The distribution substations that bring the 69,000 volts down to 12,000 volts to distribute to the neighborhoods. But the lines between those had to have protection, and we had leased copper cable from the phone company. And that didn't work real well. It had all kinds of protection on it, but when you think about you have the equivalent of a lightning bolt, a high current surge short at one end, you get a ground potential rise. then you get current flow, and copper's a great conductor. So sometimes when we needed to relay a line off was when we didn't have any communication with. We solved that later with fiber optics.
You didn't use VHF or anything like that to control reclosers and capacitor banks and things like that?
Well, it wasn't real practical here in town because we had so many substations and so little spectrum to do that kind of thing on. You could do that out in the boonies, when they were very, very far apart and didn't need a whole lot of bandwidth to take care of it. So, bandwidth is always an issue. It evolved over the years. I was there 42 years, so I saw a lot of changes.
What were the opportunities for apprentices or people with, say, limited technical skills to actually join a company like your power company or water company and actually grow in the job?
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of opportunities for that, too. They would apprentice linemen and relay technicians and communications technicians in all of those fields out there. Very nice apprenticeship programs, still have. Guys could come in pretty cold and end up with their ratings, that they needed to do that, and then progress like everybody else through technical levels and managerial levels if they desired and were capable,
Were there the applicants?
Oh yeah. There are lots of applicants. It's a very good type of work in those fields. Lots and lots of people involved in the large companies. Now, in the engineering side, we had opportunities in things like substation design and power line design. I mean, literally, there's a lot of work in getting a power line laid out somewhere. And all of that's good. I always joked with friends. They'd ask, why'd you go to communication? And I said, well, you guys deal with megawatts and hertz, and we deal with milliwatts and megahertz. it's a lot less dangerous. It really hurts at 60 hertz and stuff. No, they liked it. I said the other problem was the frequency never changed. It's always 60 hertz on their side, and so. When you think of omega 2 pi f, it's always whatever 266 or something because it's 60 hertz. it never changed, and I like the change. I like the various frequencies, and things operate differently as you change frequencies, as you know.
Getting to ham radio, what's your favorite operating mode?
Oh well, number one is CW again because the QRP that I enjoy, the power level most is most capable in CW or digital modes. I don't care too much for them. I was Luago whispering over here on 10 meters to see what the propagation looked like and getting well into Europe until the dark line hit. But no, I like CW very much. I use other modes. I do some sideband, tiny little bit of DX chasing. I've got a Heathkit SV220 linear that I can turn on once every 3 or 4 months if I think I need it.
And now this mid-show break. The QSO Today project that now includes 500 episodes of the QSO Today podcast, the curation of hundreds of hours of QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo presentations for public consumption, is now supported completely by you, the listeners. I am using a business model called Value for Value, a concept developed by Adam Curry, K5ACC, where you contribute to QSO Today exactly what you think its value is to you. Value for Value. This mid-show break and the promotion of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast later in the show are the only commercials that interrupt the program. QSO Today has no commercial sponsors to influence the content, direction, and editorial content of the QSO Today project, which exists solely for the promotion of the amateur radio hobby. Those of you that have listened to over 500 podcast episodes know that I'm not only infatuated by the amateur radio hobby, but by the people who perpetuate it as well. The hours that I dedicate to QSO Today is a half-time job. Your support at any level pays for all of the technology that I use to create, produce, host, and deliver the QSO Today podcast and the project to the ham radio community. And while it is a labor of love, it costs money. I know from statistics and surveys that only 6% of you actually contribute to QSO Today in some form. Please make a generous donation using the slider to set the amount of your donation. Make that donation monthly to ensure that QSO Today is here for the next 500 episodes. As a value-for-value donation, it should be in the amount that you value each episode of QSO Today, or your access to our amazing catalog of ham radio educational videos found on YouTube, Vimeo, and using our own player link in the show notes page. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually. Use my Amazon link in the right column of the QSO Today website before shopping on Amazon. Promote QSO Today to your friends and family by forwarding our email and social media posts. Subscribe to our mailing lists. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Tell your friends. All of these actions are value for value. Keep the QSO Today project alive by taking action now. We return to our QSO Today. Right now we're talking on Google Meet, and you're using your cell phone as a Google Meet terminal, and it's absolutely gorgeous and sounds and works amazing. Is that a Johnson Viking?
It is. Johnson Viking 2, yeah.
Viking 2 underneath a Collins.
It's an old 75A2.
75A2. You've got a lot of nice vintage gear. How did you get into vintage gear? I mean, for a QRP operator, it seems to me that there's a little bit more there than QRP.
Well, I've been a ham a long time, so vintage now was new. Back some of that was new. I don't know if you can see your audience can't obviously, but the HW101 here in the middle. I don't know if that's showing up or not. My first, well, you didn't ask me that yet, but I'll go into it. My first rig was a Heathkit DX60 transmitter, and I had an old, what was that, Night Kit Star Roamer receiver that didn't even have a BFO in it. So I listened, CW was like that, but that worked. I had the first QSOs on that thing. But when I turned 21 for my birthday, my folks got me an HW101. Which I built and loved and used for years until some Japanese solid state thing came out, and I replaced it and sold it like an idiot. I repaired some radios for a guy, and he says, I got something you might like, and he shipped it to me entirely. An HW101, a PS23 power supply, all the cables. Took about 3 boxes FedEx to get it here. And I had to refurbish it a little bit, but it's working like a champ, and I still love the old radio. You got to let it warm up a little while so it stops drifting, and nobody complains. They say it sounds good.
Well, I remember being a teenage general operator in the middle 70s, and an HW101 was the desired rig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was my dream, and they said, "What would you guys like?" They asked me and my twin brother, "What would you like for your 21st birthday if you could have anything?" And I told them HW101, and Doug told him a Fender Telecaster guitar, and he got it. He got it. Yeah.
And that Telecaster is probably worth quite a lot now.
Unfortunately, he sold it. We were both idiots back at that point.
So the rigs that we're looking there, are these rigs that you acquired along the way, or did you decide, for example, that you wanted a Viking 2 to complement the Collins radio, for example?
Right. No, that would actually lead to another. Who was my true Elmer? We didn't get there yet. He was a guy named Bob Gates. His last call sign he went by was W7AYN, Alpha Yankee November, that he actually got from his father, Harold Gates, after he passed away. And Bob was retired and cleaning up, wanting to thin down the herd there at his house. So he gave me his old station. He and his dad built this Viking 2 in 1954. And the 75A2 Collins was something he had acquired along the way. But, I I could have put it out in the shed and forgot about it, but I had just retired and had built this console here, and I designed it to hold the old boat anchors. And they're not just for show; they actually work. I like to use them on 80 meter AM when I do that too. That's kind of fun.
Do you have a technique for restoring old rigs? I mean, do you take them right down to the knobs, or do you try to get it working even if you have to put in some modern parts?
Well, yeah, that's what I do. I'm not the purist in that sense. Well, the one thing with these is take a lot of care. One hand behind the back, don't touch anything, and make sure the voltages are gone before you touch anything. But like most people say, a lot of old dried up capacitors have to be replaced. I don't go in and measure every resistor unless something just doesn't sound right. On this one, my Elmer had actually made a modification in there when he was a kid, and it looked like a kid had made it. But he never used phone. Most of his career was CW as well, so it just kind of sat not working in AM mode. And I kind of gutted that part out and put it back to original factory, and it works really well. But no, I just clean them up, check a few things, make sure the capacitors are good, replace what's bad, cautiously plug it in and no smoke, and I start playing with it, and then chase down whatever might not be sounding exactly right.
And do you belong to a 80 meter, 160 meter net, AM net, in order to use the station, or do you just go call CQ every once in a while to make sure that there's still people out there?
Yeah, it's more like that. I was in a net here in Arizona. Most of the guys were down around the Tucson area, and that was fun. But I was off for a while and came back and can't find them anymore. So it wasn't really a club. It was just a loose net. One thing that's been fascinating to me, I mean, 80 meter local is fun, but 10 meter band is so open right now, and 10 meter AM, if anybody is interested in listening to that, 29.0 to 29.2 in that range is AM mostly, and boy, they sound good. I mean, they sound as good as the FM guys, or sometimes better. Now this Viking is supposed to be good on 10 meters, but I've got a problem. It doesn't want to see any grid drive above about 20 meters, so haven't figured that one out yet. But I've got an IC7300 over here, and that and running very, very low power into the SB220 to keep from burning it up on AM. I get about 150 watts AM carrier on that, and that's kind of fun on 10.
I'm glad you mentioned the IC7300. I mean, you have a lot of boat anchors, and at some point, you sent me some pictures of some of the things that you build, and obviously we see the picture of the low band station here. How would you compare the IC7300 to the boat anchor radios you have, and is that a fair question?
Oh, yeah, it's fair. It does things that were impossible to do when the boat anchors were built. You didn't have a room big enough for all the tubes it would take to do all the functions that are in an IC7300. So by that token, it's amazing radio, and it's solid, and it's always on frequency. I use it almost as a frequency standard sometimes when I'm calibrating things. I have other ways to do that, but I'll always check it against that, because I can dial my dial to the same frequency that's dialed on it, and send a CW note, use an audio detector to see how close I am to 700 hertz on the decoded tone over there, and know I can rely on it, because that thing is very, very close with the way it works. You couldn't do those things with an old boat anchor. You remember we had crystal calibrators that would get us close to a band edge, so we were not going to jump over by accident. I think, it's just a night and day difference. Is it better? Yeah, that way it's better. Is it more fun? I don't know. To me, sometimes twisting all the knobs is a lot more fun. I don't mind the fact that you have to load and dip sometimes when you change frequency, a couple hundred kilohertz. That used to be part of it. I think we used to not be in such a hurry to turn back over to the next guy instantly. You could pause a little while and they didn't go away. They were still there. That's one thing I know about operating AM too. I have a plate switch. I don't have a push to talk switch on the microphone. So you just throw the switch and you sit back and talk until you ran out of something to say, and you turn it over to somebody else and throw the switch, and you can hear that bang. And then when they come on, you can hear the flump from their switch coming on until you hear until the carrier goes away. They're still there. You're just thinking of something to say. So AM's kind of fun that way.
Well, one of the things that impressed me about you in doing the research for this episode, you could be, a curmudgeon that says, look, I just operate CW, and I like things the way they were 60 years ago, and I'm not going to change. But then when I look at the things that you build and the things that you contribute, so for example, I saw that you did a whole article on Hans Sommer's QRP Labs about the QCX, issues you found in the QCX, the remedies that you made. And so obviously it means that you've gone from simple tube-type radios. You've even built, I saw a cake pan transmitter. So we'll put a picture of that in the show notes page. But in order to work on QCXs, you have to know something about Arduinos and about frequency synthesizers and this kind of stuff. So it looks like that as the state of the art was changing, that you were kind of changing with it, that you were kind of keeping the old stuff for the memories and then kind of advancing with the new stuff as it was coming in. Is that a fair thing to say?
Oh, yeah, that's very correct. Even in my homebrew activities, I built some solid-state things before. I sent you a picture of that little handheld 20-meter CW transceiver that I built that was before QCX came out, and I wanted something like that for field day or for just fun in the outside. But if you look at that picture, there's no displays on it. It's got an analog tuning dial, but it's got about the 7-to-1 ratio of the tuning. And if you go from full left to full right on the dial, you go the first 70 kilohertz of the 20-meter band, and that's it. And so I started learning about Arduino VFOs and things. I'm no programmer, but I can duplicate somebody else's circuit and borrow their firmware that they've got out there in the public domain, and that's how I got started with some of that. Some of my later projects, all my later projects, I don't mess with analog VFOs anymore. That's a lot of work. Keep them stable. It's a lot of work to make a stable one that'll actually stay stable. And these things, you just turn them on and calibrate them once and don't ever look at them again. Just play with them. I like that very much.
I saw a presentation that you made to an amateur radio club where you're talking about the different ways of home brewing and the different building styles, so the dead bug style, the Manhattan style. I like island pads myself because I had an Elmer that liked to do island pads with a little drill press and a pad cutter. So that's what I do. But I thought it was very interesting that you knew about all these methods. Do you employ all of these methods, and do you have certain circumstances where you might choose one over the other?
Yeah, I use them all, and most of the time you might find a combination of all of them in the same project, just depending on what I was trying to do at the time. I tried the little glue-on homemade copper squares, stick them on yourself, some cut up circuit boards. And those are fine, but I can't even get super glue to last copper on copper. Sometimes it seems to pop off when I heat it up. It's okay. And the old dead bug style where everything is floating in the air and all their leads are pointing up is fine. And it looks ugly, like they say. But you have to be careful not to have too many flying leads that aren't supported by something or it'll fall apart. And so they look temporary. Some of those are boxed up in permanent applications. But it might in one project require an island cut here and there for certain parts of it that make more sense too, and there might be some flying leads here and there that make sense and so forth. So I don't really try to relegate it to one or the other.
So whatever happens to be convenient and the best way to get something in there. Do you use hot glue to hold any components down on dead bug style?
I do sometimes. A lot of times with dead bug, at least one or two of the leads go to ground, so that holds it in place very solid.
You have a very nice workbench. I was looking at pictures of your workbench, and in this presentation, I noticed that you have many of the same devices I have. What's your favorite piece of test equipment on your workbench?
I think, the one I use the most is the oscilloscope. You can get past day one with just a digital voltmeter, but at day two, you better start looking for an oscilloscope. And I think that's the most important thing. And after that, if money allows, spectrum analyzer, I got a nice one, which I managed to burn out the cracking generator on. But dumb move one day, so I purchased a little nano VNA, and that takes care of all my filter measuring needs now. That's one of my favorite little pieces. It's not even on the bench; it's down in a box under the bench, but I'm forever pulling that thing out.
Yeah, I have one of those as well. It's quite amazing. I mean, I have the big HP box sitting on my spectrum analyzer signal generator. It's a service monitor. I could kill myself getting it off the desk, but the nano VNA will fit in my back pocket.
That's right.
What's your favorite, probably the most interesting project that you've created in your shop, from design, a pad and paper, to the finished product?
I think I sent you a picture of the transceiver that has all the buttons and knobs on the front. I was looking at the Pintec TR45L transceiver, and one of the things they advertised about that was there was just basically no menus. You didn't have, one button and a big long list of menus to deal with. And it looked to me like a good way to combine some new tech with the old codger way of doing things. So I tried to duplicate it. It looks a little rough in the picture because I've changed labels and haven't redone the front panel and stuff. That thing allows me I can set the power level I want from 0 to 5 watts on 5 bands. I've got forward and reflected power meter on the front. That's also going to be an S meter when I get that part of the circuit done. But I don't know if you know, but homebrew projects are never done. You're always adding or modifying, moving. So, but the one thing it has is one of those good old SI5351 Arduino powered VFOs, and that thing only has 2 buttons. One selects the tuning steps, and the other button selects the band that it's on. And everything else is knobs and switches on the front panel, including, since there's no tie between that VFO and the other boards for switching, I have a rotary switch to select all the filters and whatnot in there. Excuse me. And one thing that's real interesting to me, this was kind of a first foray into actual circuit board manufacturer. And I didn't do it. A friend down the street did it for me. But the bandpass filter in that thing, I designed it using the FST 3253 switcher that QRP Labs uses for the TALO detector. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can get it's 2 1x4 multiplexers basically, and I could use that as the switch because it's low current and low signal levels into the filters, and I'm switching that filter, whichever filter I need, using that solid state device, and then an external relay switching that whole switchable filter in and out between the receiver and transmit functions. It took a lot of thinking and stuffing to get that all in there, and it's not as cool as the tiny little stuff you can buy, but it was a lot of fun building and operating.
So how much of your workbench time would you say is working on your own designs versus perhaps building kits? Because I understand you also build kits.
Yeah, I build kits, and honestly, the most of my workbench time is in repairing built kits for other people.
Really?
Yeah, there's a groups.io forum QRP Labs has that's basically the entire support system for QRP Labs out there, besides Hans's excellent support. I don't mean that, but we help each other online as much as possible, and a few of us will invite somebody to send something to repair if they can't figure it out themselves. And so I've been able to through that. I've repaired about almost 150 of the QCX radios and the variants of that, the old Classic and the Plus and the Mini, and a few QDXs and then a few QMXs and QMX Pluses. I'm not as good as those. There's a better expert in town than me on that.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that listen to QSO today that also buy QRP Labs kits. What's the number one error that somebody makes that ends up sending you their kit for having it repaired?
Number 1A is soldering issues. It could be cold solder joints all over the place, or not, especially not putting enough heat to get the enamel off the wire, or not scraping the wire enough before soldering it in, and then maybe cold solder joint on top of that. It's usually always something like that. Very, very seldom a component. Count on one hand the times of all of those that it might have been a problem with a board, like a trace that just didn't happen during the manufacturing process. And so a small jumper will fix that. But it's almost always a building issue.
I've learned to remove the enamel on wire for winding coils using sandpaper. Is there a better way to remove the enamel on wires these days?
Well, any abrasive like that, or a knife edge or anything, it will get it off. But to me, it does a little bit of a damage to the copper itself. You're scraping it, so it's making it a little more fragile. I like to just use a heat stripping method if you do it right. The thinner wire, like they use that 0.33 millimeter, we call it 28 gauge in the U.S. That I can pull it through with all the enamel on it and snip it off just 1.5 millimeters above the bottom of the board, bent over where it won't fall back through the hole. Then hold my soldering iron tip on the pad and adjacent to the wire, and then feed the solder right on the tip where there's copper, and it just sucks it in and drops it on the ball every time. It makes it a perfect connection. I tried to demo that on a video, I think, one time, but I'm not sure how far it got. But to me, that everybody has their own way. It's easiest. I don't like anything that abrades the wire itself. So I just caution, be careful with that. You know.
This is obviously before people were smarter like you. You know, you learn something, maybe you even learn a bad technique, but it becomes your technique. Let me ask a question. For a person that wants to build, say, a QRP Labs kit, or any radio kit for that matter, what soldering station would you recommend? I mean, some people will go to the hardware store and they'll buy a soldering iron for, $12.99. But it seems to me that if you're going to make an investment in a QRP Labs kit or some other kit that may cost even more money, that making an investment in the tools that you use first is probably a good idea. What would you recommend?
I have one here that I would recommend, except I don't use part of it. It's a rework station. It's got the hot air gun. I don't even use that for SMD work usually because it makes a kind of a mess all over to me. I'm not a good user of one of those. I do use it to heat shrink sometimes.
Yeah, I do that too.
A temperature control station I think is a good thing. I say that, and yet my temperature is always set about the same mark, whatever that is.
Do you have a favorite brand?
No, I get something off of, I just go to Amazon or somewhere and get something. My first one, though, was a good one, and the brand is Circuit Specialists Incorporated, CSI. However, that's just rebranded from some Chinese manufacturer they imported, but they at least do a good check on those things before they buy them. They know what they're reselling, and they're a local company. So I like that brand. This one is something else. COZ or something, 898B, I think. It's cute. It works good, and I'm happy with it. I've gone through a lot of tips. I was going to say one thing that even Hans Summers talked about one time was just get a decent iron with a good chisel tip. And it sounds funny on those really tiny circuit boards, but you can turn the point around and then just touch it with that, and then you can turn the wedge around when you really need some heat on an area that's a ground plane, especially with these new QMX kits that have the 6-layer boards with 2 solid ground planes inside and things. You need some more warmth on those.
For it to all wick up through the hole.
Exactly.
Are they plating the holes through on those boards?
Yeah, they're plated all the way through, yeah.
So in theory, you should be able to solder the wire to the outside ring, and that should carry it all the way through, but maybe that's the theory.
No, that's a fact, actually, and it's funny you say that. A lot of times when I'm repairing these little radios, you can get board damage by trying to remove a through-hole part and then clean the hole and then replace the part back in the hole. That sounds like what you should do, but that's not necessarily what you should do because you can cause a lot of damage. Sometimes I'll snip the part off and solder the new one on the top, right on the pins. The pins are still soldered all the way through and everything. So it's a good connection. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. And you don't have any board damage that way.
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO.
I had this idea in the mind of an untrained individual has a time of its life, someone once told me. It seems to me that when you're looking at Chinese rework stations and things like this, that there might be 1 million of those in factories across China. Do you think that the reason that they seem to have some pretty good prices is because there's just a huge number of them being made, and are we actually buying the same equipment that's actually being used in these electronic assembly houses in China?
Yeah, it's possible. I really don't know. Don't have a good feel for it. I know they seem to do the job. Like I said, sometimes I like to buy that kind of stuff from a local supplier who has tested them and is they know what they're buying. Okay, and reselling it might cost a little more, but they add a guarantee to it. That kind of thing, and an operating manual. Important things. But, yeah, it could be the same stuff they're using in all those factories. I don't know.
What is the Center for Amateur Radio Learning?
Oh, thanks for asking. That is a club in Phoenix that sponsors a ham shack, demonstrating shack at the Arizona Science Center in downtown Phoenix. I volunteered down there for 3 or 4 years after I retired, and we teach kids I'll teach them how to do their name in Morse code and let them play on the radio and talk to people. And they have HF and VHF, UHF all there, and a lot of antennas up on the roof. But CARL, C-A-R-L, is the group that provides the volunteers for that. And the displays itself, the radios, the whole shack there is supported by one of the local Harkins Theater Company. One of the Harkins guys was a ham. And then all the equipment, they sell, auction off stuff that's donated sometimes, and the funds can buy other things, and grants can buy things. So they got a nice setup there with, now, after I left, they got some flex radios in there to show the kids how brand new computer control radios work.
Does that attract kids to the hobby? Is there some kind of way of tracking success in terms of the amount of hours that are committed to making these demonstrations and the number of kids that end up becoming hams?
I guess tracking that is a little difficult, but you can see it as it's happening. That was what I noticed. You know, it's not a huge percentage of the kids that will move on with it, but you can see it in their eyes. They're really listening, and they're very, very interested, very curious, and they're starting to ask the right questions. Then you can lead them on to local places where they can get support help some of the clubs have classes they can take, and then of course the volunteer examiners if they want to go ahead and do their licensing and everything. So we had brochures to hand out to help with all of that. Typically, most kids just, hey, that's cool, man, that's spy radio, and they'd go run off and look at something else. Teachers would bring a whole group in, and maybe one out of the whole class would want to hang around, and I'd ask him, can he hang around here just a little while longer? We're working on it. Sometimes they'd let them do that. Sometimes they'd haul them off to something else. Homeschool families were the best because they didn't have an agenda. If their kid was interested, they stayed until he wasn't interested anymore or until they had all the information they needed to go get him licensed. So that was fun.
I saw that you're a member of a number of organizations. This one services the non-hams. Are you involved in any organizations that serve the hams, and how is that going?
I'm a life member of the Scottsdale Amateur Radio Club, and I've been to one meeting. I'm being honest here. I got involved with them at one point. They had Barry Goldwater, K7UGA, our old Arizona senator who ran for president in 1964. They had his Collins S-Line station that his widow had donated to them, and I volunteered to repair it for him for the price of the parts that it needed. And I got that whole station working, and they were very grateful and gave me a lifetime membership. And it's on display in a museum down somewhere in, I believe it is. It was going to be. But I haven't been able to be involved in that club. It's too far away. I'm also a member of the Arizona Repeater Association. I was a charter member of that as a novice. In fact, signed up as a novice, so that's been a long time on that one. Recently nominated to be a member of the Radio Club of America, RCA. I'm a member of that now. And a few of the other ones, North American QRP CW, NAQCC Club.
Without getting you in trouble with the RCA, what's the advantage of being a member of the RCA? I don't think most hams know a lot about the Radio Club of America, although I happen to know a number of hams who are members.
Well, I think the advantage is access to a lot of their, webinars, seminars, meetings. I haven't gone to one, but right now they're planning one in Times Square in New York. I probably won't make that, but they have interesting speakers like the guy that invented cell phones from Motorola, that type of thing. Marty, and they're real good about young people too, getting young people involved in communications and wireless. So that's good.
Now I notice above your shoulder, hanging from the ceiling, are airplanes. So are you also a model airplane? Yeah, I do a little bit of that. When I was growing up, Dad and two of the brothers were flyers, and so I was the radio repairman. Whenever they crashed, I'd sweep it up and try to get the radio working again. I built a couple of those Heathkit radio control systems back then because I had good eyes. I could see that stuff back then. I got interested later. How is the radio packages that control these RC planes, how have they evolved? Are they still like 49 megahertz or something like, wasn't it something like that? Oh, no. Yeah, no, they were on 27 megahertz and 72 megahertz. And if you had a ham license, you could get one on 6 meters from Heathkit anyway. Some of them had those. But they were all AM at that time, just on-off keying. So they were very susceptible to power line noises and other junk. No, what it's evolved over time into is it's all on 2.1 gigahertz now. And it's, the frequency sharing is amazing. You can put thousands of airplanes in the air at the same field now. If you could have that many and tell which one was yours, it is physically, technically possible to do that with no interference. The airplane is bound to the transmitter and it can't hear anything else or can't respond to anything else. I'm sure a wide band noise across the band would knock them all out of the sky, but that's about it. And how has it evolved physically? Used to, the receiver alone was this big, and the servos were that big each, and the battery was about that big just to run the radio. And then you had the big old gas engine that put oil all over the thing. Whenever you finished flying, you had to get out the wash rags and stuff and clean it up.
It's all gone electric now. So you have full electric drive and real tiny parts. And I've got a plane back here I bought recently that's weighs less than 250 grams, so I can fly it without any kind of FAA registration numbers or anything. It's legal to fly with no. You require remote ID on them now because so many people are flying their drones up into airplane passages and stuff. So this new one, the entire receiver and servo controllers and the gyroscopes and all kinds of stuff built on a circuit board, and they're about that big. Doesn't weigh anything.
About the size of a 50-cent piece, something like that.
About right, yeah. I'm sorry for the listeners. Yeah, very small.
They can control X number of servos, and servos are things that like move the rudder, move the ailerons, right?
Right.
But do they have camera inputs now or other sensors that you can use to monitor the operation from the airplane itself and bring it back to the user?
They do. You can put full person view FPV camera on the plane and put a head a head screen right on your face, a face screen, I guess, and fly the thing as if you're sitting inside the airplane looking out. By the law, you should have a spotter watching you to make sure where you really are and what's going on. But you can do that. They have telemetry to come down to tell you when the battery is running low and all kinds of stuff like that.
They have GPS, for example, so that it might be able to find home on its own?
Well, I'm not real familiar with those parts of it. They do at least have wing leveling. If you get in a panic, you can throw a switch and it'll level out, or maybe fly a slow circle and land low power, that kind of thing. They have built-in features where if you're a new pilot, you can set it so that it won't allow you to do a complete aileron roll. It'll just it'll go to a certain amount and then level back out on you, or only allow a certain kind of turning. But I like to turn that stuff off and have more fun with it.
Are there any unique opportunities for licensed ham radio operators to play a part in the radio control airplane hobby that would be different than somebody who just goes to a hobby store and buys a plane kit?
It's hard to answer that. I think we could probably use legally amateur radio frequencies for some of the downlink stuff. Like fly a transmitter. You could fly a low power repeater or something up there if you want to do that kind of stuff. I don't think there's any rules against that. We have teleoperating or something procedure possibilities on the license still. I don't know of any radio equipment that operates on the ham bands anymore, at least legally. So, yeah, it's hard to answer that one.
Maybe power. If you used one of the ham bands, 2 gigahertz band, the amateur portion of it, you could operate more power, a watt or two.
That's true. That'd be an opportunity if there was such equipment available. I can see that.
Where you could get the thing out about 100 miles away.
Well, there's other rules that apply there. You're not allowed to fly it past where you can see it.
Where I'm sitting right now, we're getting drones that are flying from Iraq, and they've been in the air for 6-7 hours before they come in here. So different drones for different folks.
Yes, indeed. And those are a totally different kind of drone.
Different kind of drone. Yeah, they're made of wood, though, apparently.
Well, that's good. Keep
them nice and light. What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
I think one thing that I see that doesn't always work for new hams is they'll get their technician license and they'll run right down to the store and buy a dual band handy talkie and they're a ham, and that's good. I don't mean it's bad, but sometimes it never ever goes beyond that. I think advice would be to keep your mind open, look at all these different opportunities. You're going to find something that really, really intrigues you. And it may not be just talking to a buddy on a repeater. It's nice to have that ability to keep that around and do it when you need and want. But you need to be thinking kind of down the road other things that there's so many things to do. You'll find that niche or two. There's no lifetime long enough to pursue amateur radio out in every angle. You know that too. So look beyond the starting point to some and find somebody. That'd be the other thing. Find a good mentor immediately. I'm Elmering several people at once. Both my brothers will tell you I'm their Elmer, but also a couple of ladies that we know, friends who are extra class now, and have been helping them with the antenna problems in their HOA place. And just find somebody that can help you.
Ron, it was such a wonderful pleasure to meet you and to have you on the QSO Today podcast. So I just want to thank you for participating and wish you 73.
Thanks, Eric, and it was my privilege and honor, too. I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you and very, very nice meeting you. 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ron. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WA7GIL in the search box at the top of the page. You can sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous episodes by clicking on the transcription button on every show notes page. The cost is $75 per episode, regardless of the length. We will quickly transcribe the episode and give you credit for your sponsorship. Please send us the call sign of the podcast to make sure that we transcribe what you want. Remember that QSO Today is value for value. Please support our project by making a donation or becoming a listener sponsor today. Use our Amazon link before shopping at Amazon, as we receive a small commission on your Amazon purchases. Subscribe to our mailing lists, both my blog and the podcast, and forward the messages to friends and family who would enjoy QSO Today content. Promote us on social media and give us a 5-star rating and reviews whenever you are asked. QSO Today is available on every podcast player and venue, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Podcasting 2.0. Get a Podcasting 2.0 player to make it easy to get your next episode as soon as we publish. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Ben also publishes a weekly Jewish history podcast. There is a link to that on the QSO Today homepage. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.